Mom was the real wealthy daughter in a tragic novel. My uncles all said she was a liar who only pretended to be sick and played the victim to gain sympathy. The fake wealthy daughter stole Mom's fiancé, forced her to have a child with a man outside, and in the end, she begged my uncles with a bitter smile to forgive Mom. Mom hugged me tightly and silently agreed. Everyone thought the drama between the real and fake wealthy daughters was in the past. Until I was 8 years old. Mom climbed onto the rooftop in a breakdown and jumped off. I stood calmly behind her and murmured, "If this is what you want, fine." Mom was the real wealthy daughter. I'd known that since I was a child. She wasn't as beautiful and elegant as my aunt, who could sing and dance and always had a crowd around her. When I was 5, I innocently asked my eldest uncle, "Why are Aunt's hands so white and soft, but Mom's hands are so rough?" They were like dry branches fallen on the ground. My eldest uncle held me, sneered, and glanced at Mom. "Because your mom was born to work hard. She doesn't know how to enjoy good fortune and instead causes trouble for others." Mom's eyes welled up with tears when she heard this. Later, I learned that the nanny who worked for the Smith family out of jealousy had switched Mom and my aunt. Mom was taken away by the nanny and forced to take care of her good-for-nothing younger brother and gambling father in the countryside. When she grew up, she was almost raped by her adoptive father and sold as a wife to a 50-year-old man. Mom hit her adoptive father on the head, and with the secrets she overheard, she found the Smith family, but she didn't expect that she'd stepped into another hell. Because of Mom's phone call, her parents died in a car accident on the spot. My 2 uncles almost hated Mom to death. When I was 6, I took out a stack of change from my pocket and said to Mom seriously, "Take this, let's leave this place." Mom was stunned, and the corners of her eyes gradually turned red. Trying to suppress the panic welling up inside me, I quickly added, "I earned this by doing homework and buying things for my classmates. It's not their money, Mom. I won't spend their money." But Mom didn't take me away. She just hugged me tightly and said with a sob, "Listen to Mom, you can't leave this place." She sent me to school and picked me up on time every day, always with such a gentle expression. I naively thought that such a life wasn't so bad. When I grew up, I'd take Mom away from here, and she'd never cry because of these people again, until one day, when Mom was taking me to school, George roughly pushed open the door of the Smith family's house. His eyes were glazed and abnormally red. I stepped in front of Mom, but he pushed me away. Mom was so scared that she quickly told the driver to take me to school. To reassure me, she forced a pale smile. "Don't be afraid. Mom will pick you up tonight." But I didn't wait for Mom. When I went back, I saw my aunt standing there looking fragile, smiling sadly, and George stood at the door with a dark expression. "A person like you wouldn't change even if given 100 chances. I was stupid to believe Winnie and let you off the hook. Riley, why don't you just die?" My eldest uncle looked at her disappointedly. "Riley, Nancy is so unlucky to have a mom like you." Mom was disheveled, and despair filled her eyes. I felt both and angry and ran towards Mom. Mom seemed to sense something, turned around, saw me at the door, and tears streamed down her face. But she didn't reach out to hug me as she used to. Instead, she shook her head in pain, her eyes filled with guilt and determination. The next second, Mom stumbled towards the balcony, pushed open the glass window, and jumped off. I could clearly see Mom's lip movements. She said, "I'm sorry, Nancy." My world seemed to spin violently. Screams and shouts filled the air. Mom and I lived on the top floor, the 4th floor, of the villa. The moment Mom fell, blood splattered. She was like a broken butterfly, heading towards her destined end. When my eldest uncle came to his senses and came to pick me up, I was still standing there in a daze. He thought I was terrified, so he picked me up with his cold hands, trying to comfort me and also hide his own panic. "It's okay. It's okay. Mom has been sent to the hospital. She's done so many wrong things before, and she never tried to kill herself. Why did she go too far this time?" I didn't say a word. I just stared blankly at the place where Mom had jumped. They didn't know that in that instant, many things flashed through my mind. Some things suddenly became clear. It turned out that my mom was the real wealthy daughter in a tragic novel. I looked into the distance and murmured, "If this is what you want, fine." My uncle looked at me in confusion. "What are you looking at?" Meeting my expressionless face, he paused, averted his eyes, and even seemed a bit guilty. "I'll ask the nanny to keep an eye on you these days. Study hard and don't run around, okay?" He didn't know that I was looking at what was behind him. Mom stood there, tears streaming down her face. She was still wearing that white dress, now stained with red, as if she wanted to say something. Back in my room, I looked at Mom and smiled gently. Don't worry, Mom. I'll study hard, you watch carefully, they'll get what's coming to them. It's okay if you don't take action against them, but they must pay back what they owe you. George and my two uncles had a huge argument. Winnie and Riley are both daughters of the Smith family. Why did you force her to die? My eldest uncle said, looking heartbroken. It seemed he'd forgotten the times he'd told Mom to die. George's eyes flickered, and he said coldly, if she hadn't seduced me, none of this would have happened. She deserved to die. Winnie came out with red eyes and took George's arm. We all saw what happened. If it wasn't for my sister, how could such a thing have happened? The servants at home also said that it was clearly my sister who dragged George upstairs. My second uncle's expression wavered, as if he wanted to say something. I ran downstairs with a diary in my hand, pushed Winnie hard, and tears poured down my face. It wasn't Mom, I saw it. He wouldn't let go of Mom. Winnie staggered and almost lost her composure. What do you know? So many people saw it. Don't talk nonsense, kid. As she spoke, she grabbed my wrist and threw me to the nanny. I struggled desperately, and the diary in my hand hit George's foot. I kicked Winnie and sobbed. I want Mom. Give me back my mom. Winnie was the darling of the Smith family and had never been treated like this. She was about to reach out to me, but a pair of hands stopped her. George casually opened a page of the diary, looked at me with a complicated expression, as if confused and scared. Are you, my daughter? George snatched me away from the nanny. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I rushed forward to grab the diary from George. That belongs to Mom. Give it to me. George didn't let go. Winnie looked at him in disbelief with red eyes. George, what are you talking about? We all know exactly who this bastard's father is. Riley drugged you and went into the wrong room. She had a one-night stand with some random man. Are you crazy? George clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Even in death, she still plays these tricks. Riley reached out, seemingly wanting to take the diary from me. I slapped her hand away without hesitation. Why should she touch Mom's things? I hugged the diary and went upstairs, hearing George's murmur behind me. What the hell is going on? As soon as I entered the room, the white figure by the bed looked at me with tolerance. I couldn't hear Mom speak. I could only look at her expressionless face as she quietly stayed by my side. Later, George didn't come to the Smith family for several days. My uncles and aunt argued all day about what to do with Mom's funeral. They hired a new nanny to take care of my daily life. She always looked at me with pity. At the parents' meeting, the teacher asked me, "Why isn't your mom here?" "Mom is in the sky." The teacher was silent for a long time. Just as she was about to call my uncle, George suddenly appeared at the door. "I'm here for the parents' meeting." The teacher looked at George curiously. "Are you the child's father?" Before he could answer, I said coldly, "No, he's my uncle-in-law." George was speechless. He seemed to want to say something to me, but after thinking about it, he held back. I ignored him and returned to my seat, staring blankly at a spot in front of me. When I came to my senses, the teacher was looking at George reproachfully. "Nancy hasn't been in a good state recently. Her mom used to pick her up every day." George pursed his lips. What kind of person was she, Riley? I suddenly wanted to laugh. People are so strange. They never believe what they see with their own eyes but only believe what others say. I heard the teacher say, "Riley was a very kind and gentle mom." George was stunned and gave a strange smile. Kind, gentle. She was really good at pretending. The parents' meeting lasted the whole morning. In the afternoon, I got into George's car. He was going to take me back to the Smith family. For the first time, I ignored Mom's shaking head and refusal and said calmly, "I'm not going there." George looked at me strangely but still told the driver to drive in the direction I pointed. We went to the supermarket and bought a lot of daily necessities, using the card Mom gave me. Finally, we stopped in front of an orphanage. The director came up with a smile. "Nancy, why didn't your mom come today?" Before I could answer, George spoke up. "She's busy today. I'm here with Nancy." The director gave him a meaningful look, as if she'd misunderstood something. She pulled George and started talking nonstop about Mom. "Riley is a good girl. She brings Nancy here to visit the children every month. The children here are just like her, orphans." George frowned in disgust. "She said she's an orphan. She's just a gold digger who abandoned her adoptive parents and insisted on coming back to the Smith family. She'd do anything to climb up the social ladder. Not to mention sleeping with men." The director's smile faded. "Don't judge without knowing the whole story. Didn't anyone ever teach you that, Mr. George?" Her attitude was aggressive. her eyes fixed on George, and her tone was a bit agitated. If it wasn't for Riley going to negotiate for sponsorship for these children 8 years ago, none of that would have happened. George grasped the key point sharply and his lips trembled. 8 years ago, I stared at him intently. You bastard. You didn't ask a single question in 8 years. What are you pretending for now? Riley is a good girl, and so is Nancy. It was all the fault of that drunk man, although I don't understand why Riley didn't call the police. But Mr. George, if you slander her like this, leave. You're not welcome here. As she spoke, the children who had been eavesdropping inside ran out one by one and started pushing George. Get out. Aunt Riley is the best. You're a bad guy. We don't welcome you. Winnie saw it with her own eyes. How could there be a problem? Shame flashed across George's face. But soon, he answered a phone call and looked at me in shock. He put me in the back seat, got in the car with a cold face, and drove fast and recklessly. I knew the paternity test results had come out. I couldn't help but feel. George drove at full speed all the way. I almost threw up sitting in the back seat. I probably understood what it meant by the outlaws outside the law on TV. His hand holding mine was trembling slightly. He pushed open the door of the Smith family's house, rushed into my bedroom, and took out Mom's notebook. March 24th. My brothers hate me. They say that I caused the car accident of Mom and Dad. I'm not as generous and decent as Winnie, not like a real wealthy daughter. Fortunately, I still have George by my side. April 3rd. George confessed his love to me. Riley and my brothers look very unhappy. Did I take something from Riley again? But clearly. I'm the daughter of the Smith family. July 2nd. Why did this happen? I'm not jealous of Riley, and I didn't drug George at all. August 10th. I'm pregnant, but they don't believe that this is George's and my child. George opened the notebook page by page, and tears fell onto it. I looked at him expressionlessly and thought to myself, these are truly crocodile tears. Riley trusted me so much, but I believed others' words too easily and treated her like that. George held the diary and sobbed uncontrollably. This commotion alerted the people upstairs. My eldest Uncle Mandy and second Uncle Sam were surrounding Winnie. When she saw George, she said pitifully, George, I really didn't expect that Nancy is actually your daughter. Why didn't sister say it all these years? Mandy's expression turned to disgust. She wanted to marry George before. If she had said it, this child wouldn't have been kept. George roared with red eyes. That's enough. She's already dead. Do you still have to speak of her like this? Are you really her family? Riley tried to step forward and pull him, but George pushed her away. Even if Mom had said it, would you have believed her? As soon as the words fell, I was stunned for a moment. Since I was a child, whenever I wanted to speak up for Mom, it was as if I had lost my voice. I could only watch her being misunderstood by her so-called family. But this time, I actually said it out loud. I subconsciously looked behind Winnie. She shivered, turned her head suspiciously, but saw nothing. My uncles fell silent, because they all knew that Mom had said it. I saw this part in the plot. That day, Mom had wanted to find someone to donate money, but she was set up by Winnie and ended up in George's room. No matter how much she resisted and pushed away, the plot was like an invisible big hand that pressed her firmly onto George's bed. After regaining her ability to move, Mom immediately ran out trembling and took the emergency contraceptive pill, but she still had me. When George woke up, Winnie, who was disheveled, was lying beside him. He learned from Winnie that he had been framed by Mom and had accidentally had a relationship with her. His face turned pale. Winnie was crying like a tearful person, asking her why she had framed him and herself. If sister hadn't calculated against George, such a thing wouldn't have happened to us. I didn't want to steal sister's fiancé. My uncles protected Winnie behind them. George looked at Mom with disgust. You don't have to pretend anymore. When I woke up, I saw Winnie. Cancel the engagement. You deserve it. Mom stood there, looking desperate. At this moment, George opened his mouth and then lowered his head dejectedly. When Mom returned to the Smith family, he had taken a fancy to the gentle and kind Mom. Ignored Winnie, who was pursuing him, and was determined to get engaged to Mom. But later, he also said that Mom was scheming and only knew how to pretend to be pitiful. When Winnie saw his appearance, she panicked. George, what's the use of listening to a child's one-sided words? Nancy wasn't even born when this happened. Besides, when I went to that room, you were the only one in there. Sister is very good at making up stories. Who knows what she told Nancy? George pursed his lips and said coldly, Riley is already dead. How can she make up stories? If it wasn't for you sowing discord, she would have been my wife long ago. and Nancy wouldn't have had to be called a bastard by you for all these years. Winnie's face turned pale. George ignored her and turned to my uncles, saying, Nancy is my child, and I want to take her back to the Johnson family. Mandy reacted first and frowned. No way. You and Riley were about to get married. If Nancy recognizes her ancestors and returns to the family at this time, what will others think of her? Sam also nodded, with a serious look in his eyes. This child won't be wronged in the Smith family. You just need to take good care of Winnie. George's face changed several times. He took a step forward, clenched my hand, and said sarcastically, the engagement, does she deserve it? Nancy is my daughter, and I won't give her to you. After a pause, his eyes turned red. And he said to me in a hoarse voice, Nancy, I'm your father, will you come with me? I turned a deaf ear. I pulled my hand out and said word by word, no, I won't. I don't have a father, I only have a mother. You were her fiancé, not my father. These words were like a knife stabbing into George's heart. He looked hurt all over his face, and his voice was a little choked up, but I felt extremely satisfied in my heart. Why should he be able to live so well after hurting my mom? Why should all the mistakes be written off just because someone is dead? He just has to admit his mistakes, apologize, and enjoy the glory and wealth of the rest of his life with repentance. There's no such reason, Winnie said in a low voice with a pale face. George, although I don't know why Nancy is your and sister's child, if sister were here, she wouldn't want you to take Nancy away like this, right? She really knows how to be sarcastic. I immediately retorted, since when is it your business? Why is my father your fiancé? Are you proud of stealing your sister's man? Mandy's face changed, and he shouted angrily, Nancy, how do you talk to your aunt? Winnie opened her mouth, and tears fell one by one. She looked extremely pitiful. If it were before, George would have rushed to comfort her without hesitation, but this time, he just glanced at Winnie indifferently and said, lowering his head, Nancy, it doesn't matter if you don't want to leave now. I will come to see you often. Call Dad if you have anything. After George left, Winnie cried so hard that she was out of breath. Big brother, second brother, don't you believe me either? I really don't know why. I woke up lying beside George that day. She bent down and looked at me, with the right amount of hurt in her eyes. Nancy, your mom is dead. From now on, you can only stay with your uncles and aunt. Don't be angry with your aunt, okay? Winnie doesn't seem to have changed much in the past few years. She's not as beautiful as Mom, but she's much more cheerful and bright than Mom. I looked up at her and suddenly said, Aunt, you're very beautiful. Winnie smiled, and my uncles were also happy. They said that we were a family and should get along well in the future, unlike George, who said he was my father, but he had treated Mom very badly all these years. I shook my head and stared at Winnie in confusion. You're very beautiful. Mom was even more beautiful than you originally. Why has she become more and more haggard these years? Mom is the real daughter of the Smith family. Why are you living a glorious life while she's dead? Aunt, it should be you who should be damned. My uncles gasped. Winnie was like being struck by lightning. She stared at me blankly, and there was even a hint of fear in her eyes upon closer inspection. But I didn't look at her. I turned to my uncles and said, Is it because of the Johnson family's company? Mandy didn't react and stepped forward to try to hold my hand. I sidestepped to avoid it and added, You want me to stay in the Smith family because of the business with the Johnson family, right? My grandparents were very capable people. They built up a fortune when they were young, but my uncles only knew how to revolve around Winnie all day long. In order to save Winnie's face in recent years, they had already squandered most of the company. It was all supported by the Johnson family behind the scenes. Without George, their comfortable life was almost coming to an end. Hearing me say this, my second uncle Sam's face changed greatly, and he pointed at me tremblingly. Nancy is only 8 years old. How could she understand all this? It must be her. She's back. As he spoke, he nervously picked up the clothes on the sofa and stumbled out of the door. Compared to Mandy's crazy partiality for Winnie, Sam didn't seem to care about her that much. He only cared about whether he had money to spend. As long as Winnie could give him money, she was his good sister. At the slightest sign of trouble, he ran faster than anyone else. I looked at the remaining Mandy. He was the current person in charge of the Smith family. What are you talking nonsense about? I'm only keeping you here because you're of the Smith family's blood. Otherwise, who do you think would want you? A burden. I said, oh, and tilted my head to look at him. Then I'll go back with Uncle George now and see if he wants me. A burden. Mandy immediately softened his tone. Nancy, whatever you want, Uncle will buy it for you, but I didn't care about that. I said, I can stay, but I have a condition. I want Winnie to take care of me. Mandy let out a sigh of relief, and a flash of relief crossed his eyes. Winnie is your aunt after all. Since you want her to take care of you, it's no problem. Winnie stopped crying and agreed. I had been observing her. She didn't show much expression on her face, as if she thought this request was nothing. Maybe she wanted to get back together with George through me. Unfortunately, she was going to be disappointed. George soon sent several maids. They were said to be nannies to take care of me, but I refused. I want my aunt to take care of me. Mom is gone. And I'm very scared. What I said yesterday were just angry words. After all, we are a family. The nannies looked at me with pity. I had just lost my mom. My face was pale, and I timidly held Winnie's hand. She curved her lips and said gently, I usually spend more time with Nancy. Let me take care of her. If George wants to see Nancy, I can take her to the Johnson family. I didn't say anything. Several nannies exchanged glances and just said coldly that they needed to ask George. Winnie's smile froze on her face. I guess George had given some instructions, otherwise they wouldn't dare to act like this. I felt much more at ease then. I quickly let go of Winnie's hand and wiped it on my clothes without leaving a trace. Aunt, accompany me to watch cartoons. Winnie nodded, but after one episode, she was absent-minded and looked around. From time to time, she asked me if I wanted to see George. Does Nancy want Mom and Dad? Aunt can take care of you together with Dad. Then the children at school won't dare to bully you. How about it? Winnie brought a plate of peaches with a smile. My fingers paused, and I picked up a skewer and took bites. Under her expectant gaze, I pushed her hard. If you want to marry George, tell him yourself. You two are a perfect match, you bitches. It makes me sick to call you Mom and Dad. Winnie was stunned. In the Smith family all these years, I had been even more silent than Mom because I couldn't open my mouth and speak. I sneered at her, an imposter, a bunch of blind and heartless scumbags. Winnie couldn't stand it anymore and pushed me with a scream. I fell hard on the coffee table and cried out for Mom. As soon as the nannies entered the door, they panicked. Winnie came to her senses and shook her head nervously. No, she cursed me first. The leading Wendy calmed down and quickly came to check on me. My throat was getting itchier and itchier, and I was getting dizzier and dizzier. I said in a low voice, I want Mom. Wendy picked me up in a hurry and took me to the hospital. I'm allergic to peaches and almost died. The doctor scolded George severely. He looked at Winnie coldly. Nancy is just a child. Isn't it enough that you drove Riley to death? You won't even spare a child. Winnie was at a loss for words. Her tears were no longer the universal antidote. Countless times in the past, as the weak one, everyone had stood on her side, but now there was someone more vulnerable than her. Everything that Winnie was good at didn't seem to work anymore. George turned his back to me, and every word he said stabbed at Winnie, where he couldn't see. I slightly curved my lips and said silently, bitch. Winnie screamed in anger. No one believed her. Just like when Mom first returned to the Smith family, Winnie framed Mom for ruining her dress and embarrassing her. Even though Mom didn't do it, they still didn't believe her, because Winnie had no reason to frame her. Just as I have no reason to frame her either. It's only fair. Mandy rushed to the hospital. The first thing he did was ask George what he intended to do. He didn't show any concern for me, nor did he comfort his beloved sister. His collar was slightly wrinkled, and he looked dejected. It seemed that the company had been struggling recently. Winnie can't take care of Nancy. I can find someone else, Mandy said wearily. Rubbing the space between his eyebrows, I whispered, I want Auntie to take care of me. When George saw that I was awake, he immediately asked about my condition and tentatively suggested, how about Dad finding you some other nannies to take care of you? Your aunt has her own things to do. I silently shook my head and looked at them with great difficulty. Mom said Auntie would be good to me. Auntie took Mom's place. But Mom never fought with her. She just wanted Auntie to be good to me. Tears welled up in George's eyes as he murmured, Riley was always so kind. Why didn't I believe her back then? Mandy's expression remained unchanged when Mom was mentioned. I looked at him and said, Uncle has a stomach problem and should eat on time. Meeting his gaze, I lay in bed and gave a pale smile. Mom said so. She said Uncle could never take good care of himself, so she would always cook porridge herself and ask Aunt Lee to pass it on to Uncle. Mandy's eyes flickered. He opened his mouth but remained silent for a moment. A sense of guilt filled the air. I then softly asked, Where's Mom? When will she be back? If she were here, she would definitely take good care of me. Winnie couldn't stand it anymore. that's enough, I'll apologize. It was my fault for not taking good care of Nancy. If I find someone else to take care of her, will you be satisfied? I looked at her calmly. Mandy was the first to react. No, Nancy wants you to take care of her. Besides, she's right, you took the place that belonged to Riley. So you should help take care of Nancy. Winnie was on the verge of tears. She was furious but had nowhere to vent her anger. I sighed. What kind of ridiculous novel is this, where one can only get justice after death? George warned Winnie, if anything else happens to Nancy, I'll make you pay with your life. Winnie was exhausted from defending herself. It wasn't me. George ignored her, just like he used to. He's still as deaf as ever, I thought to myself. When Wendy went out to get the medicine, Winnie suddenly asked me coldly, are you satisfied with framing me? I blinked and suddenly started to choke up. Auntie, what's wrong? Did I make you unhappy again? Winnie was getting impatient. She's gone. Stop pretending. What was I pretending for? Naturally, to prevent her from recording me. Auntie, if you want to have a baby with Uncle George, just tell Mom and ask her to find me a new dad. She's always been kind and won't hold it against you. Wendy came back just in time to hear these words and her face darkened. Winnie fell silent, hanging her head dejectedly. At night, Winnie returned to the Smith family, and Mandy stayed with me at the hospital. Lying in bed, I flipped through those tragic novels, trying to find any useful information, but due to my limited literacy, I struggled to read them, and it gave me a terrible headache. The first half of those novels mirrored almost exactly the first half of Mom's life. Mandy suddenly asked, "What are you reading?" The three of us asterisk. I replied casually. Mom liked reading it. Mandy was taken aback and blurted out, "Your mom could read." Realizing his mistake, he quickly tried to make amends. I said indifferently, Mom had many favorite books and hobbies. Since Uncle didn't talk to her much, it's normal that you didn't know. Mom loved doing handicrafts. She was a handicraft blogger online with tens of thousands of followers. She could make beautiful hairpins, beadwork, and even stuffed dolls. She loved the color purple and matcha flavor. She was beautiful, more beautiful than Auntie. Unfortunately, he knew nothing about these things. Perhaps my gaze made Mandy feel uncomfortable. He tried hard to recall, when your mom first returned to the Smith family, our parents died. We didn't have time to pay attention to her. If she hadn't made that phone call, I looked at him in confusion. Why did Grandma and Grandpa die just because Mom made a phone call? Uncle looked at me deeply. They were originally going to discuss business, but because they heard about your mom's urgent matter, they changed their route and collided with a truck on the road, causing the car accident. I still didn't understand. That was the truck driver's fault, or perhaps Grandpa's driver didn't notice all the dangerous situations. Why don't you blame them? Why do you have to blame the daughter that Grandma and Grandpa loved the most? Uncle, is there no one else for you to blame? Mandy was left speechless. He couldn't meet my gaze. Ignoring him, I murmured, Uncle George and Auntie have been together for so many years but never got married. Is it because he really liked Mom? If only Mom were still here, she could take care of me, and Uncle George could look after the company. People like him are good at making assumptions, imagining what could have been theirs, and fueling the resentment in their hearts. As soon as dawn broke, Mandy left as if he had been set free. After that, Wendy took care of me. She was very kind and always kept an eye on Winnie to make sure she didn't do anything to me. Naturally, Winnie didn't dare to. Instead, she was worried about what I might do to her and wanted to stay as far away from me as possible. Just like Mom when she first came to the Smith family, realizing that no one would help her, she instinctively tried to protect herself. But Winnie hadn't let Mom off easily. When I was 5, Mom had planned to take me away. I saw her quietly packing our bags, putting in my clothes, toys, and my favorite stuffed animals. But then I suddenly started having a fever. I didn't say anything and let Mom take me out. In the end, I couldn't hold on and collapsed on the roadside. When I woke up, we were back at the Smith family, and Mom was crying by my bedside. Uncle looked at her reproachfully, and Mandy even slapped her. He said Mom had locked Winnie, who suffered from claustrophobia, in the basement on purpose and tried to run away with me. Mom didn't defend herself but just looked at me with a strange expression, as if considering something. After that, she deliberately avoided these people. Whenever she talked about my uncles, her expression was always indifferent. Thinking of this, I looked at Wendy. Her eyes were as gentle as Mom's. She would coax me into taking my medicine and tell me stories. Wendy, will Dad like me? I blinked. Wendy smiled. Of course, if you miss your dad, you should tell him, mister. George likes you very much. If nothing goes wrong, there will be a new mom to take care of you soon. So the Johnson family was setting up blind dates for George. I nodded thoughtfully. Then I want to see Dad. Wendy stroked my head. Okay, naturally, Winnie had to come along too, since I couldn't do without my aunt. When we saw George again, she looked pitiful and held my hand awkwardly. George nodded indifferently, his expression unchanged. I let go of Winnie and grabbed George's hand, looking at him affectionately. Dad, I missed you so much. George was stunned for a moment. Then he looked at me excitedly, but since he wasn't good at interacting with children, all he could say was that he would buy me whatever I liked. Wendy said you missed me too. Is that true? I widened my eyes. George looked at me tenderly and nodded, giving Wendy an approving glance. Of course, and Dad wants to find you a new mom to take care of you. Would you like that? Winnie's face fell. She stopped avoiding me and reached out to me, her tone stiff but commanding. Nancy is too young to accept a stranger. Should take care of her. I shook my head. I want a new mom. This took Winnie by surprise. Her face turned pale, and she gritted her teeth, whispering, "What are you up to?" I blinked. Nothing. I just want a new mom, that's all. When she leaned in closer, I whispered softly, "You like him. I just don't want you to get what you want." George had long wanted to keep me away from Winnie. Now, he couldn't have been more pleased with the situation. Even though he talked about missing Mom, he still took me by the hand to meet another beautiful woman. She was very pretty and gentle, but occasionally, when she turned sideways, a shrewd glint would flash in her eyes. While George was on the phone, I asked her directly, "Do you want to marry my dad?" The woman was taken aback, then nodded with interest. "But don't worry, I won't have children to share your family fortune. The company needs it." Good. She was very straightforward. I have a way. "But you can't marry him, you'll have bad luck." The woman suddenly laughed, her eyes crinkling. She seemed to find it amusing, but perhaps to humor me. She agreed. I didn't explain further. She would find out soon enough. Winnie wasn't young anymore. She had postponed getting married because of George. The Smith family's company was getting smaller and smaller. Mandy was too preoccupied with saving himself to care about her. Recently, he had been avoiding her and was impatient whenever he talked to her, only telling Winnie to take good care of me. How could someone who was once the center of attention endure such humiliation? I didn't go back with Winnie. Mandy rushed to see me right away. George had been showing mercy to the Smith family for my sake recently. "Nancy, why don't you want to go back with Uncle? Don't you want to live with your aunt anymore?" My body trembled, and tears welled up in my eyes. "I don't want to stay with Auntie." My ambiguous answer made Mandy furious. He turned around and slapped Winnie hard. "She's just a child. When will you stop this nonsense?" Winnie was stunned. "I didn't do anything." Mandy snapped at her coldly. "Enough. I wasn't unaware of the tricks you played on Riley. I just didn't bother to say anything. Treating a child like this, you're hopeless." Mandy looked at Winnie with disappointment. She suddenly started screaming and cursing at me like a madwoman, calling me and my mom bitches. I also started screaming. Instead of cursing back, I just kept crying for Mom. George and Mandy were shocked. They never expected Winnie to act like this. George picked me up while I was sobbing uncontrollably and ordered the security guards to throw them out. That night, I had a fever and was haunted by nightmares all night long. "Mom, don't leave." George and Wendy stayed by my side the entire night. When I opened my eyes the next day, George had dark circles and bloodshot eyes. He immediately had someone move all of Mom's and my things out. From there, he found Mom's diary from 8 years ago, combined with the investigation of the orphanage. He probably finally understood what had really happened back then. George cried all night long. I heard him say hoarsely, "Don't hold back. Take down the Smith family." But I felt nothing inside. It was something that could have been discovered with a little effort, yet no one was willing to look into it. They all deserved to accompany my mom. Living in the Johnson family was no different from living in the Smith family. George was very busy during the day, and I didn't like talking to him. I only paid attention to him when he mentioned taking action against the Smith family. "Nancy, Dad only has you now. If I take good care of you, will Mom come back to see me?" George seemed to have lost his mind. I looked past him indifferently. The white figure behind him turned away. I answered for Mom. "No." George looked devastated. He bought me a lot of expensive things, trying to make up for me and also trying to mend his broken conscience. Mom must have been so desperate when she died. "If you get justice for her, maybe she'll be happy," I whispered in George's ear like a devil. George murmured, "You're right. They all wronged Riley. They must pay the price." George was ruthless. His reckless actions terrified his parents and the Johnson family. He directly sidelined them, used half of the family fortune to target the Smith family. Mandy was terrified and tried to come to the Johnson family every day. But George refused to see him. He only had one thing to say: "I don't want to die and see Riley still hating me." When Mandy wanted to see me, George asked for my opinion. And I agreed. When I saw him, I sighed. "Uncle, Mom suffered so much. Someone has to pay the price." So Mandy seemed to understand. He kicked Winnie out of the Smith family and publicly acknowledged Mom's identity. Unfortunately, the Smith family still went bankrupt. Although George stopped his attack, other companies in the industry knew that the Smith family had lost their backing and were eager to divide up the Smith family's assets. The members of the Smith family were left homeless. Mandy looked haggard, with a thick beard. When he came to see me, he seemed to want to say something, opened his mouth, but then remained silent. If only Riley were here, none of this would have happened. He seemed to have aged overnight. However, I didn't care much. I was relieved to see him suffering. It's worth mentioning that Sam didn't accept his fate as calmly as Mandy. With his luxurious life gone, he angrily went after Winnie, beating and kicking her. Blaming her for ruining the Smith family, Winnie fought back. But due to the natural strength advantage of men, she was accidentally pushed off the third floor by Sam during the fight. She didn't die but ended up paralyzed. When George took me to the hospital to see her, I looked at her calmly. "Auntie, do you think it hurt when Mom jumped?" She looked at me in horror, as if I were a demon. Sam was sent to prison and sentenced to 3 years for attempted murder. Mandy stayed by Winnie's bedside, seemingly ready to take care of her, but the favoritism in his eyes was gone, replaced only by hatred. I could already envision the rest of Winnie's life. After seeing the members of the Smith family, George stood at my door in the middle of the night like he was possessed, muttering to himself, "Nancy, will she forgive me? I've done so much for her." When she first returned to the Smith family that year, she was like she was fleeing from a disaster, although she was a bit reserved. Her eyes were exceptionally bright. It was me who brought her back to the Smith family. But all these years, we've all let her down. We've all treated her badly. Wendy hugged me tightly. George was always like this. It seemed that there was something wrong with his mental state. Wendy was very worried about me. I patted her and tried my best to soothe Wendy. "He's my dad. It's okay." I casually found an excuse to persuade Wendy to go out first. She looked at me worriedly and reluctantly left the room. George looked up blankly. "I always feel that Riley is somewhere near me. Does she hate me?" I stared intently behind him. The white figure shook its head. "She doesn't hate you." George let out a sigh of relief. I corrected him again. "Without love, there can't be hatred either." In fact, in the Smith family, most of the time George ignored the hardships Mom had endured. In the past, when she had a tough time in the Smith family, George pursued her, but he didn't change her situation. Sometimes I wonder that for Mom, maybe she just wanted someone to talk to. But now, none of that matters anymore. George was stunned, and his tears fell to the ground. His mental state was so worrying that he simply called in a lawyer and made a will, leaving all his property to me. I sighed. "Donate it. In Mom's name." George nodded. "That's fine." A few months later, he seemed to be constantly experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Whenever he talked about Mom in front of me, I remained silent and looked at him with tolerance. George also realized that he had gone crazy. Half a year later, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. I told George's worried parents from the Johnson family that it would be better to send Dad to a psychiatric hospital abroad, where the medical conditions were better, but in fact, it would be easier for him to get completely lost there. The parents of the Johnson family agreed. They had just managed to get back to the company and couldn't wait for George to disappear. Soon, George left as well. I didn't feel like talking and often spaced out. Wendy stayed by my side. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. I knew it was my turn, but when I stood by the window, there was a force that stopped me. I finally saw that familiar figure clearly. There was gentle disapproval in her eyes. "Mom, will you hate me? I'm his daughter. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have become this damned female protagonist." When I was 5 years old, Mom wanted to take me away. I opened my mouth, wanting to say, "Mom, you can leave on your own. Don't worry about me. I can take care of myself." But I couldn't say it out loud. Mom didn't leave. I thought it was because she didn't have enough money, so I worked hard to save for a year. But she still didn't leave. Mom said that I had to stay here. It wasn't until she died that I understood what she meant. I was the means to tie her to the plot. a hateful shackle. Only after she died and this damned plot was over could I live my own life. I cried my heart out. Since the day Mom left, I could see her. This damn tragic novel, why couldn't she find peace even after death? Grief welled up overwhelmingly. A pair of hands gently stroked my head. I heard Mom's voice again. She said, Nancy has never been a shackle to Mom. Our Nancy is the best daughter in the world. Come on, help Mom take a look at this world. Okay, Nancy, we will meet again. I was in tears. Okay, Mom, after hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.